Spyro Year of the Dragon first released in October of the year 2000. It's a game, you might have heard of it, I like it a lot. You probably won't be surprised to hear that it's my favourite game of all time. Despite this, I feel like there's still so much to learn about the game. Like, getting two eggs at the same time in Icy Peak. That is very much a thing that a lot of people don't know about. And how about this one polygon in this one part that doesn't act like acid for some reason? All of these are obscure, to say the least. Not things you'd normally bump into on your average playthrough. I think that's generally true of most of this game's interesting quirks. They're not like right in front of your face or under your nose the entire time, right? Anyway, recently I realised that every egg in the entire game releases one shell fragment which uses the wrong texture. It wasn't until a couple years ago actually that I first noticed this. Whilst playing Sunny Villa, I noticed a strange orange glimmer, get it, in my periphery when I collected the Miles egg. I loaded a save state and did the same thing again, and to my surprise, it was right there. Literally right in front of me. Nearly 20 years of playing this game, and yet this is the first time I'd ever even noticed it. And I hadn't ever seen anyone talking about it either. Like, ever. I still don't see anyone talking about it. I've seen one person mention it once. This is the kind of thing which, like, Nitroff recently uploaded a video, which, like 2 seconds into the video, you can see this fragment. Like, no one notices. How does that happen? I thought at first, though, that perhaps Miles was just a particularly unusual egg. Maybe, like, I don't know, only Miles releases this one fragment, none of the others do, that's why I've never noticed it. And then I noticed that every other egg in the entire game had the same golden fragment. It was just easier to spot with Miles than with many of the other dragons for some reason. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the GameSpot prototype in the room. Oh, no, my mistake. The expression is elephant in the room. Anyway, this golden texture is something that I had actually seen before, quite a long time ago actually. This was the same texture that's used for the shell fragments in the GameSpot pre-release build. We don't actually know what the eggs look like in this build at time of recording, but we do get a pretty clear image of what the shell fragments looked like. Using a model viewer to get a closer look at the shell fragments, it's pretty clear that something went wrong here. One of the 8 different shell fragments uses completely the wrong texture, this one here. Why this texture specifically? We'll come back to that. Alright, fine. So why is it more easily seen with Miles than with other eggs? Is it something to do with the level geometry perhaps? I mean, in some levels, for instance the Jonah egg in Evening Lake, the egg is far enough off the ground and the ground is angled in such a way that the fragment bounces off the floor in a way which is actually quite easily visible. For most of the rest of the eggs, the shell immediately clips through the floor when the egg hatches. This doesn't actually explain what's going on with Miles though, the reality is a bit more subtle than that. To build a picture of what's going on here, we're going to have to look at the hatching animation frame by frame. Before the egg hatches, the only object present is the egg itself. As soon as the egg cracks, the egg object unloads and in its place a handful of eggshell objects and the baby dragon appear. If you look closely, you'll notice that one of the fragments is the golden one, though this is more easily seen from some angles than others. The shells also form the shape of an egg too, which is a nice touch considering that this is like one frame and no one will ever notice it. This is actually true of only 140 of the game's 150 eggs. That means there's 10 eggs which hatch a bit differently. There's Miles, the Glide to the Spring egg in Sunny Villa. Sanders, the Rescue the Mayor egg also in Sunny Villa. John, the egg you get after racing the butterflies in Mushroom Speedway. Matt, the Super Flame the Flower Pots egg in Midday Garden. Modesty, Climb to the Ledge also in Midday Garden. Sam, the dragon you get inside the Ninja HQ and Fireworks Factory. Shelly, the first egg you get in the Jack and the Beanstalk challenge in Charmed Ridge. Lloyd, the one you get on the Crystal Tower in Crystal Islands. Will, release the Temple Dweller in Haunted Tomb. and finally Dan, the Leap of Faith egg in Dino Mines. These are the eggs for which the gold shell piece is easier to catch. It just sort of gently floats off to the side of the screen instead of shooting downwards. Why do these eggs hatch differently? Well, watching one of these eggs hatch in slow motion reveals the answer. The shell pieces aren't in the shape of an egg. They're just sort of clumped. So I guess the shell fragments were given slightly different momenta too, hence why one of the fragments stays on the screen for longer. But why these eggs specifically? Why these particular dragons? What's special about them? Well, if we look carefully, we might begin to see a pattern emerging. For 9 of these 10 dragons, the animation performed by the dragon is one that involves one of the eggshell fragments. This shell piece actually isn't another eggshell object, but rather it's part of the baby dragon object. So there's a correlation here, right? Well, we still need to account for the edge cases. Some eggs feature the more common hatching type, but have a dragon animation which features a piece of the shell, and one egg has a less common hatching type but uses a regular dragon animation. If we want to make more sense of this, it'll be helpful to plot the data into a contingency table. Bear with me on this one. Let's call the more common hatching type Type A, and the less common one Type B. As for the dragon animations, we'll call the regular animation Type R, and the one involving the shell Type S. Really imaginative names, I know. Anyway, this table represents how many eggs of each type there are. It's quite easy to see from a quick glance that there's some sort of correlation going on here. Plugging the numbers into Wolfram Alpha confirms this. In other words, it's not a coincidence that there's some sort of correlation between the hatching type and the animation. The only egg to have hatching type B but animation type R is Sanders in Sunny Villa. There's 3 eggs which are animation type S but hatching type A for some reason. Both Siegfried and Roy in Sergeant Bird's Base and Aiden in Lost Fleet. Since Yin Yang is a sort of exceptional egg in the sense that no other egg uses its animation, I'm just including it amongst the normal type R eggs. In case you're wondering, it uses hatching type A. The rest of the eggs are hatching type A and animation type R. Let's focus for a moment on an egg which isn't an A-type egg, but also isn't S-type either. Sanders. In earlier versions of the game, specifically the earliest demo build, Sanders is still a B-type egg, but here he uses an S-type animation. It might be worth hypothesizing that, perhaps, the shells which are B-type in the final game were, at some point, S-type during development, perhaps when the eggshell fragments were first implemented. Some of the earliest builds of the game don't use shell fragments at all, and yet some of them still have S-type animations. This would also suggest that the eggs which are S-type but not B-type actually use different animations at some point in development. And hey, look at that! Some of the pre-release footage supports this hypothesis. Let's go back to the demo for a moment. Sanders and Miles actually can't be seen under normal conditions since they're in the main area of Sunny Villa, which you're not supposed to get to in the demo. Both of their animations use this greenish texture that was also seen in some of the pre-release footage. I think this probably derived from an even earlier eggshell design. It does sort of resemble the egg scene in the heads-up display after all. Also, where's the golden fragment gone? Well, as it turns out, the gold texture is only present from the second demo onwards. Why does it not feature in the first demo? Well, the shells all use the correct textures and there's no sign of it in the game's VRAM. So, my guess? Maybe the demo's earlier than the GameSpot build. It sounds a bit iffy at first because, I mean, the GameSpot build has clearly this non-final shell design. The demo has a final one. Why would it be earlier? But the thing is, if the GameSpot build was earlier, that would mean that the texture would have to go away and somehow just reappear later on one of the shell fragments. That's a bit weird, isn't it? It's an unusual concept, but perhaps they'd originally opted to use the final white egg texture before experimenting with this sort of ornate gold design and then deciding, looks gross, and reverting it back to their previous idea. And perhaps when they did this, they also accidentally left the texture present on one of the shell fragments. It probably went unnoticed from this point because, I mean, well, it took me long enough to figure out it was there, so it wouldn't be a stretch to say that maybe they didn't realise it either. It's hard to be certain though. No other evidence tells us any more about which of these two builds came first, They're really, really similar looking builds, aside from the obvious shell fragment difference. And there's this weird transparency bug too, which appeared in a few of the levels. Assuming we're correct and the demo is earlier than the GameSpot build, that puts the earliest demo at some point before June 23rd, 2000, about 3 months before the game's final build. Cool. Actually, while we're talking about the demo, I've just realized this part of my script is a little bit out of date. It's now sort of believed that this demo is probably around May 25th. So quite a bit earlier than June 23rd. The reason we think it's May 25th is specifically because of this one version number string, which is in the game's data. For a long time, we thought, oh, 525, that's probably just a version. Maybe it doesn't mean anything at all. Now we have some evidence to support the idea that it's actually probably a date rather than just an abstract version number. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about these shell fragments. The whole thing is just super weird, and I don't understand how nobody really ever talks about this. Maybe everyone knows it and they just never mention it because it's not that interesting. I think it's cool though, and I have no idea how it took me so long to notice they're in the game, but they're here, and they seem to reveal a bunch of weird stuff about the game's development too. And now, like me, you too will never be able to watch your egg hatch again without noticing the golden egg fragment. You will never unsee it, it's always there, and it's exactly like how the title screen of Sonic the Hedgehog is offset by 8 pixels to the left of where it's supposed to be. Yeah, that's made the game completely unplayable, hasn't it?